Welcome back, everybody. So class is now in session. We're talking Eskom again. Now, the power utility has dismissed reports that South Africa is on the brink of stage 7 load shedding. On Wednesday, Eskom warned that South Africa could face higher stages of load shedding if electricity usage was not reduced. Now, indefinite stage 6 load shedding was already implemented earlier in the week. We are now on stage 5, but Eskom has been subjecting South Africans to perhaps its worst ever electricity outages. And nearly half of Eskom's installed capacity is currently out of service due to unplanned breakdowns and maintenance work. Now, should South Africans brace themselves for higher blackout stages? Well, we have just the man to help us navigate and understand what is going on at this point. Independent Energy Analyst Clyde Mallinson, who developed a predictive electricity model that shows South Africa may experience stage 8 load shedding unless Eskom's performance improves. You'll remember him from a while back, visited us here in studio with those graphs. He's here again to talk to us about what is currently happening. Clyde, so good to have you. Welcome to Morning Live.
Morning, lovely to be here again.
So it's amazing how, as we go along, we learn, and our lexicon is improved upon. Now we talk about energy availability factor, but let's just start with the definition of what that actually means.
Energy availability factor says if you've got 100 taxis, how many of them are able to carry passengers today? And you might say, well, we've got 60 that are available. 10 of them are in for planned service and 30 are broken. So we have 60 available. Doesn't mean we use all the available ones. We might only need 50, and that's the load factor or the capacity factor. So the load factor is always a little bit lower than the availability. You can't use it if it's not available, but just because it's available doesn't mean you use it. So it's a useful term, but not that useful, because they also talk about the availability of our pumped storage. But the pumped storage spends half its time filling up so that it can release again. So although it's available for a lot of the time, it's only available to generate half the time, because the other half the time it's charging up. So it's not a very useful term for pumped storage, and yet they use it for pumped storage. Same with the OCGTs. They're available to produce, but we haven't got enough dosh for the diesel. So they can't run all the time, even although they are available. In fact, they're not meant to run all the time because they're just too expensive. So I prefer to look at what's actually being produced by, let's say, the coal fleet or the nuclear fleet. It's not really a fleet, it's a single one. That's a more useful thing, is to see how much electricity is actually being used, or produced. Not are they available or not.
So how much do we need to effectively be on, and it's cringeworthy, but we're now talking about, what is acceptable levels of load shedding. How much do we actually need and how much do we have?
I don't think load shedding is acceptable at all, any level. We use on average as a country 26,000 megawatts on average. But at night we drop to about 16, and on cold winter evenings we go up to about 34. So there's quite a big variation. Although the average is 26, we don't often use 26. We're normally using less than 26 or more than 26. So we need to be able to produce the equivalent of what 26 gigawatts would give us in a year in energy. And then we need to have boosts of that energy at times when we need lots, like on a cold winter's night. So energy is like running the marathon, and the boosts are every now and again we have a little sprint at a time when people are using more demand. And that's part of the problem, is that we have quite a big fluctuation in demand. And to meet that fluctuation is why we generally have higher stages of load shedding in the early evenings. Having load shedding at night now is really scary. That shows we have a lack of energy. We're having to shed load at night to make space for the coal fleet mainly to pump the water back up into the pumped hydro storage. So we're filling our batteries at night, as it were. Eskom's filling its batteries at night by instituting load shedding. because you can only store when you've got a surplus. And at the moment, we ain't got a surplus any time of the day. So we're having to create that surplus by reducing demand, which is load shedding.
And of course, as you say, we often say, because we wake up in the wee hours of the morning, and maybe for those who are asleep, they're not aware.
Yes.
But a lot of the time now, there is no electricity
Yes.
in overnight, so to speak.
So we need less electricity at night, but we haven't even got enough to give us that lower amount. So we're having to shed some of the load, as I said, and we're desperately filling up our diesel stocks and our pump storage that allows us to then run that sprint at 7 o'clock in the evening. If we hadn't filled those emergency reserves, we would definitely be having shortfalls of 7 or 8 or 9,000 megawatts in the evening.
So what is the shortfall at the moment?
Well, the shortfall at the moment is kind of the worst we've had so far year to date is an average shortfall of about 3. But that's average. So the shortfall is sometimes 6 or 7 or 8 at peak times, but the average is 3. And when a shortfall reaches 8, the energy intensive users, the big guys, the mines, the smelters, they generally deliver 2. But they don't get switched off. They have to curtail. So they reduce their load and are able collectively to save us 2,000 megawatts, which is 2 stages, if you like. And then the rest of us have to stump up 6. So the 6 and the 2 then make 8.
Wow.
So
Okay.
shortfall of 8, 2 from the big boys, 6 from the rest of us.
Not ideal in any way you look
Not
at
at
it,
all,
because
yeah.
even the 2, the big boys are complaining about, because it means they need to halt production on quite a
Well,
significant scale.
yeah.
So, Clyde, I think at this point, South Africans are asking the question of, are we going to see higher levels of load shedding again? So I think let's get into it.
Yeah, well, let's just have a look here. This is an interesting chart. So it's not showing energy availability factors. This is actually showing the hour-by-hour output of the Eskom coal fleet from 2020 to 2023 year to date. So it looks a bit like a hairy caterpillar. I apologize for that. See if you can spot where lockdown was for COVID. It happened in 2020. Can you see the drop-off in the graph? That was lockdown. And then we climb in winter and we drop down. So the low points are normally Christmas. These low points are normally around about Christmas. And the higher points are where the coal fleet generates more in winter because it's doing less planned maintenance. But the disturbing thing is you can see the downward trend.
Yes.
The output from the coal fleet is on average about 1 stage of load shedding less year on year from 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023. The output of the coal fleet is dropping by about 3 percentage points each year. And you can see the red line is the trend. So when we're talking at the moment about how well we're doing this year, well, we're not doing that well. You just have to look at last year to see. We momentarily do well. And this fluctuation here is actually the difference between day and night generally. So we tend to do more at peak times and a bit less at night. But it's a very disturbing trend. And if you look at the next slide, it's actually, this one gives the actual load profile now. So the red is that's how much we need. Okay, and this is for 2023 only. So we've taken one of those caterpillars and expanded them, and we're looking at the load for 2023. The black line is what we're getting from coal, and the gap between the black line and the red line needs to be filled with other things like wind and solar, etc. And if we can't fill it completely, this purple line at the bottom here shows load shedding. And it's quite interesting. Right in the middle of winter, this point here marks the beginning of winter, and you can see there's a drop-off in demand. And you say, why did that happen? And the answer is because the price goes up dramatically in winter. So a lot of the big users choose to shut down their operations for the duration, the 3 months of winter, because the price of electricity is higher than they can afford to run profitably. So they shut down and they reline their smelters and things. And you can see that drop. At the same time, the coal output went up because remember, we do less planned maintenance. And so the severity of load shedding dropped. And we moved here into what I call capacity load shedding. We only shed in the peak in the evening and we had no load shedding at night. So you might remember in June when you got up early in the morning, there was no load shedding. Luckily, because it was pretty chilly then. Then along came July and we had some cold snaps where suddenly we needed more. And you can see, boom, we suddenly go into 24/7 load shedding. So if we look at the next one, this just shows what the, this is now expanding it further, and this is just showing a week. And this is actually the last week of July, from Monday through to Sunday. So it shows the load profile, and you can spot the evening peak. This is the evening peak. This is the midday, the nighttime trough. There's a bit of a trough in the midday. This is nuclear, this is coal, this is Cahora Bassa, this is hydro from Garib and van der Kloof. This is wind, the yellow is solar, the green is coming out of storage, the grey is Eskom diesel, the pinkish colour is the IPP diesel, and the right on top we've got a little bit of CSP, this orange. And this is where we're putting into pump storage. So at night, when we've got a bit of a surplus, or if we have some load shedding, we've got some spare and we can fill up the pump storage so it can come out in the daytime. Now what I wanted to show you, which is quite exciting, is what would happen if we doubled the wind and solar that we currently have. So let's look at the next slide. We're going to double the wind. Look, can you see it starting to fill the gap where we have the shortage? Not much happens at night, although there's some good wind here at night. We're able to store that. But let's just go back to the previous one and have a look at that. We'll see if we just toggle back. Then we go back to this one. You can see the wind and solar fills that daytime gap. And this gap is load shedding. We're not able to meet the demand. So let's go back to the next one. There we go. So that's not that much. I mean, doubling the solar would be adding about 2,500 megawatts. And doubling the wind would be adding about 3,000. And it doesn't get us completely out of the woods, but can you see how much better it is already?
It certainly is much better, but the question is that wind, and solar power available to us at this point?
No, we got to put the facilities in. We've got plenty of sun in the country and plenty of wind that's available, but we would need to put more wind and more solar facilities in place. So quite a nice way to look at this is to look at the metros.
But when you say put the facilities in place, Clyde, what does that mean?
Because build wind farms and solar farms.
But haven't we commissioned some of those already?
We're doing it at about 1/5 of the pace we ought to be doing it at. We're focusing all our attention on trying to repair the coal fleet. It would be great if the coal fleet could produce more, then this would also lift and we would also close the load shedding gap. But we saw from our graph that try as we might, the performance of the coal fleet is dropping year on year. And we've heard it for the last 4 years now. We're going to do deep philosophy maintenance. It's going to get better. You can't catch up lost maintenance. If you don't go to the doctor for your annual checkup, you can't skip for 5 years and then go 5 days in a row and say, I've caught up my checkups now. And it's the same with maintenance. You can't catch it up. What you can do is you can fix things that broke because you didn't do the maintenance. But now it's extra time, extra money, and some things when they break seriously and you can't fix them, like a blowing up turbine or something.
Right, we're running out of time,
right.
So where do we want to take it next?
Let's just go to the next one quickly. I just wanted to show you, this is some work I've been doing with PARI, the Public Affairs Research Institute. This is what the metros use. So let's just focus on Joburg. That's the average that Joburg uses, about 1,200 megawatts. But it goes as low as 600 and as high as 2,000. Remember I told you that fluctuation. And there are all of the metros. Let's just go to the next slide. And this is what the metros need to take them up off of 4 stages of load shedding from 6 in the morning to 6 in the evening. Yellow is solar, blue is wind, the green is storage. And that's what each of the metros needs to do to take them off of load shedding. It's not excessive. Joburg needs about 1,100 megawatts of solar and about 600 megawatts of storage. And if they did that, this is what they would save. So if we go to the last slide, this is what Joburg would save. Joburg would save in wholesale electricity purchase costs about 1 billion. That's 1,000 million. They would also save from sales that they're not currently getting because they're having to curtail. And then lastly, that would be macroeconomic development losses. And I've priced that at 10 Rand a kilowatt hour. Cape Town say that it costs their economy 100 Rand a kilowatt hour. But if I made this 10 times the size, you wouldn't be able to see the blues and the greens. So that's what each of the metros needs to do as metros. And the towns and cities of South Africa can also take themselves off of load shedding by putting in enough energy to make up for the energy shortfall with solar and wind, and then putting in storage, which allows them to sprint at 7 o'clock in the evening. And that's what's possible and what we need to focus on.
Love that, the solutions that are possible, and hopefully we'll have time. Maybe we'll get you back, Clyde, to talk about this in a little more detail. But that, unfortunately, all the time we have this morning. Clyde Mallinson, always great value, giving us a masterclass on what's needed and, of course, where we find ourselves. Energy expert Clyde Mallinson, looking at the possibilities there of what we are facing and, of course, what can be done to mitigate some of those losses.